Good evening, and thank you for watching tonight. My name is Michelle Kauk, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's Legislative District 12 debate. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor for this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections hosts debates so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. Candidates that have a contested general election have been invited to participate in the debate. Candidates that have opted into the Clean Elections Clean Funding Program are required to participate, while traditional candidates are invited and encouraged to attend. Please note, candidates from both the House and Senate may be participating in the debate tonight. And as the moderator, I will ensure candidates have the opportunity to engage directly with their respective opponents. The questions that will be asked this evening are coming directly from voters. Leading up to the debates, Clean Elections conducted outreach to voters across the state, soliciting questions for the candidates. Voters that are watching the debate live, you can submit a question at any time by email, debates@kc-a.com, by text, 928-362-1062, or by phone at 480-937-1297. Make sure to specify if your question is directed at a particular candidate, and in this case, we have one candidate for the evening. We do screen questions for clarity to eliminate duplication, speeches, or personal attacks on candidates. This debate is scheduled for half an hour, so we may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. Candidates will have 1 minute for their opening and closing statements, and 1 to 2 minutes for responses to voter questions. I may limit responses for time management purposes, and we remind the candidates and the audience that this is a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate may vote informed. Candidates running for the state Senate for District 12 are Representative Warren Petersen, a Republican, and Lynsey Robinson, the Democrat. You may vote for one of those candidates at the election. Joining us tonight is Lynsey Robinson, the Democratic candidate for state Senate. Ms. Robinson, you may begin with your opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Lynsey Robinson, and I'm running for state Senate in LD12. Thank you, Clean Elections, for hosting this debate, Michelle for moderating, and to all of you who are watching the debate. The two questions that I'm often asked when I speak to voters are why I'm running and what are my qualifications. In terms of my background, I have a bachelor's degree in political science and philosophy. I have a master's degree in education and a doctorate in law. I'm a licensed attorney with the Arizona State Bar, and as a former teacher and attorney, I believe that I have firsthand knowledge about the issues most important to the survival and prosperity of our state. But it is really my personal life experience that I think catapults me ahead of my opponent. As a former dreamer, teacher, and survivor of both childhood domestic violence, a survivor of childhood molestation, and an adult survivor of a physically abusive first marriage, I have direct insight on the issues that matter most and that are most poignant to the vulnerable members of our community, women and children. As someone who grew up in poverty, but found solace and escape in the pages of paperbacks like Sweet Valley High, I know that education is the greatest equalizer. And most importantly, I know what we need to do to get to the other side. I speak of this with great pride because I know in this district there are those under the sound of my voice that needs the reassurance that there is hope. All is not lost. As an attorney, I have worked with the same group of people that have backgrounds that mirror my own, and which is why I had taken a position as a staff attorney at Legal Aid. I know where the vulnerable go because that's where I went to find help. But our legal system is not always fair. Injustice is often delayed and at times absent. Our legislature has the ability to make the most impact where it matters most, which is why I decided to run for office. With so many divergent views on how to solve the crisis in our state, we need someone who has been on the other side of the issues to provide us with insight. We can't help those whom we seek to serve if we have never made an effort to make them part of the conversation and embrace them when they earn their seat at the table. Women everywhere in our state have earned their seat at the table, but our district yet to be represented by them in the legislature, despite the fact that they outnumber men in our district. That means what matters to us never get prioritized by those who seek to represent us. It's time to put aside partisan politics and elect a candidate who cares about you and your family. Vote for me because I'm committed to fully funding our schools, securing a prosperous future for every child in our state, and to stand against corruption, abuse of power, self-dealing, and quite frankly, cruel and cold-hearted politicians who only vote in their best interests, even in the face of a global pandemic. It's time to be our brother's keeper and to vote up to our highest ideals and standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson, for your opening remarks and for your statement. At this time, we'll go into questions that we have received from voters. And again, remind folks that they can send in a question if they have them, and they can do that by email, text, or phone, and I'll repeat that information just a little bit. And we'll start off with the first one, and let's touch on, let's talk about criminal reform. Right now, the United States has the largest reported prison population in the world. What will you do if elected to champion criminal justice reform?
Criminal justice reform is not just about the prison population, although obviously we have to do something about the prison population. But criminal justice reform is also about the homeless population and drug addiction, not to mention mental health. We have about 43,000 people incarcerated for nonviolent offenses, and of those people, about 32 to 34,000 roughly of them are people who have drug addictions and need rehabilitative services, mental health services. Of those people, only about 1,000 of them are receiving the services that they need. And this is a problem. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to really look at what we're doing. We're spending about $1.3 billion incarcerating people, when really what we should be doing is looking at how do we first keep them from entering into the justice system in the first place. And that goes to looking at what is it that we are doing with our budget. How much of our budget is going to housing? How much of our budget is going to the development and the economic things that we could be doing to help keep people out of prison? For example, once a nonviolent offender is in prison, they can be there for a very long time, disconnected from family, disconnected from really society and the world. And then they're just released without any rehabilitative measures. They are just released. And so ultimately what happens is they find themselves in a position where they're put right back into prison, because if the issue is drug addiction, well, they didn't get any services to help them when they come out on the other side. If the issue is mental health, without having mental health services while in prison and then a continuation of that when they come out and having the support services that they need, they likely end up offending again. And so there goes our recidivism rate. What we need to be doing is we need to be putting money into rehabilitation, reentry programs, putting money into helping them not only get the counseling and the services that they need, particularly when drug addiction is involved, and helping them become clean, but then in staying that way. But then we need to be looking at how we can put them in a position where they can get real job skills, putting them in job programs where they can get job skills, where they can get jobs that actually will allow them to make a living wage. jobs that will allow for them to have for them to be able to take care and provide for themselves, because there is dignity. There's so much dignity in work. And so by doing that, we can help reduce the recidivism, we can reduce the rate of people going back to prison. And by the same time, we can reduce cost.
Thank you. And you touched on mental health, which is obviously a very front and center issue, especially right now. A lot of mental health issues have come to the forefront during COVID, and they've already been on the rise. But one of the groups that we're seeing it affect the hardest is our teens and adolescents. And the rate of teen suicide attempts is one of the highest in the nation. And anxiety and other mental health ailments are also on the rise. Is Arizona as a state doing enough for mental health awareness and treatment?
I don't believe that we are. I think we can be doing more for mental health. Like, one of the things that we could be doing is making sure that everyone actually has access to affordable mental health care. It needs to be a part of the package of their insurance plan. The other thing that we need to be doing when we're looking at mental health is we need to be looking at, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we had about 900 to 1 student to teacher ratio of counselors in our schools. And that's a recipe for disaster. And in addition to that, we have now added, with all the other things that were going on prior to the pandemic, we have now added the pandemic onto that. And so our children, our students, they are really going to need resources to help them get through the impact of the pandemic. And one of the ways that we can help them is by making sure that we reduce the number of, or I should say, increase the number of counselors in the classroom so that students have access to adequate counseling. And, our teachers need it too. They need to be able to have our counselors as someone that they can turn to for guidance, particularly when they observe that there is something with a student that they can't quite put their finger on and they're unsure as to what might be going on, whether it is abuse going on at home or something else. They need to be able to reach out to our counselors and to receive guidance so that they can properly identify the child that needs support, and then the counselors being able to provide them with the support that they need. And we can't leave out a huge population of women and children and the homeless who really need mental health services. So many of the people who need mental health services, unfortunately, end up in our prison systems. And so if we want to reduce cost, we have to address the need for mental health.
Thank you. This next question comes from a voter in Pinal County who is an educator and an author on public health issues. They say, now more than ever, we see the importance of listening to scientific experts in the face of a national health crisis. We see the effects of the pandemic in our communities, such as unemployment and homelessness. They have 2 questions in regard to this. The first I'll deliver. As a science advocate, they want to know how you plan to ensure that science is central to government decision making.
Thank you for that question. I believe in the science. I believe in listening to the experts. As I heard a couple of people put it, and I think I kind of like the analogy. If you need a plumber in your home, you're not going to ask a statistician to come and to fix your plumbing. You're going to go to the person who is the expert in the field, who can give you the best quality advice for the issue that you have. And I believe in science. I believe in listening to the experts. That's what they're there for. And so one of the things that we can do is we can just stop making public health a political issue and work to protect and preserve the lives of people by listening to the experts. The experts have told us what we need to do. They tell us that we need to wear masks because masks reduce the spread of COVID-19. They tell us that we have to socially distance at a minimum of 6 feet. They tell us to constantly wash our hands and not to gather in large groups. with people who, who do not live in our homes. And so the issue is not the science. The issue is we've weaponized uh, uh, healthcare. Excuse me. We've weaponized the issue of healthcare and following the science for political purposes, for political gain, which I don't think there's much political gain here, but that's what has happened. And as a result, people are dying and people are getting hurt. For example, if you consider the fact that our governor has refused to issue a mask mandate, and let's just look when our board of supervisors issued a mask mandate, that's when our numbers started to go down. They can go down even more dramatically if we were to have an actual mandate from our governor for the entire state, because this virus is not limited to boundaries. It doesn't matter if Maricopa County has a mask mandate, but then Pinal County doesn't have one, and people are traveling back and forth between the two counties. We're still exposed to community spread. And so listening to the science and then applying it in a way that is uniform throughout our state is the best way to get a handle on this virus and to do what's best for our community.
Well, and this follow-up question is timely. You obviously are aware of the November 3rd election coming up as a candidate. If you could help put any provisions into place for this election system to help ensure that elections are safe, fair, and accessible during COVID, what are some of those provisions that you would like to see put in place, or ways to help make mail-in ballots more accessible even?
Thank you for that question. So let me begin by saying this. According to news sources, our president votes by mail. Our congressional CD5 candidates, Joan Green and Andy Biggs, vote by mail. Warren Petersen, my opponent, and myself, we vote by mail. Our House candidates, Jake Hoffman and the other gentleman whose name escapes me, Travis Grantham.
Yep.
Thank you. Vote by mail. So every single candidate that is in, I think I left out our presidential candidate, Joe Biden, based on what I have heard in the news, has voted by mail. And so every single candidate that I have mentioned that is going to show up on your ballot in LD12 votes by mail. And so I think the answer is clear that this is a partisan issue, that both parties vote by mail, and that any discussion to the contrary is really nothing more than a smokescreen in an attempt to really suppress the vote. Now, in terms of what else we can be doing other than voting by mail, I support making sure that we have vote centers open for people who, for whatever reason, either choose not to or unable to vote by mail. I think that the fact that the majority of the population in our LD, if I'm not mistaken, about 80% of the population in LD12 vote by mail, means that we're looking at only 20% of the population, and that is a positive. That will be going to the polls. And so that means that it will be a lot easier for us to socially distance and to be able to take the measures that the experts have asked us to take in cleaning and sanitizing, keeping everything safe in order for voters to vote.
I'll take this opportunity to remind voters at home that if you're watching this live, you can submit any questions at any time by email, debates@kc-a.com, by text 928-362-1062, or by phone 480-937-1297. We'll switch gears a little bit here with this next question. Right now, we had a little dip in temperature, but man, this summer it's been a scorcher. We've had a record number of 110 plus degree days and very few monsoons for the season. Is Arizona as a whole, or Arizona leadership as a whole, doing enough to make climate change part of the legislative agenda? And if so, can you give examples? And if not, what do you recommend the state do?
Well, I'm not really aware of any bills that was recently passed to help reduce to help climate change in our state this past election cycle. Um, but I think some of the things that we certainly could be looking at is, for example, let me approach it from this angle. When we look at other cities that are prosperous from an economic perspective, and we look and we see, well, how can we become like them? How can we become the next Silicon Valley, if you will? The way you do that is not by copying Silicon Valley and trying to make yourself Silicon Valley. I believe the way that you do that is you take a look at what resources you have naturally available to you. What can you exploit in a safe and meaningful way? And for us in Arizona, one of the things that we can exploit is the sun. We have more sunny days than probably many other states. And so we need to be exploiting that. We need to be looking at solar energy, not only for the purpose of, reducing our electrical, costs and helping families financially with their utility bills, but also as a means of protecting our environment and wind energy, if applicable, and in all the things in that area. We need to be looking at how can we reduce our dependence on fossil fuel. We also could be looking at potentially encouraging vehicles that are hybrid models or run on electricity in our state, so that we can reduce the number of reduce car emissions in our state. The other thing that we could be doing is we can be looking at mass transportation, because that will help get the number of vehicles off of the road, which will then help protect our ozone layer. I think there's quite a bit that we can do in terms of protecting our environment, but it begins by actually accepting that climate change is real. And until we can accept that climate change is real, I don't think we're going to be able to move in the right direction. So for me, I am a believer in science, and I believe that climate change is real. And so without being an expert on the subject, I will listen to the experts. I will hear what they have to say, and I will take measures that I think will help move us in a positive direction and will help move our state in a positive direction. And I have to tell you, doing so actually will help strengthen and help our economy as well, not to mention bring so much desperately needed jobs. When we think about this pandemic and how it has impacted us, think about what it would have meant if we already had our mass transit systems already in place, trains, commuter rides, and things of that nature. What that would have meant in terms of where we are financially, and having to really work really hard to figure out how we're going to make ends meet financially for our budget for our state. The state had $1 billion, well, has $1 billion surplus, and there's so much they could have done with it, from investing in education to investing in our infrastructure, which would have created jobs. But really, they chose not to. And while I support saving money, we have to do it in a manner in which we are also thinking about moving our economy forward. So save some and spend some, particularly when your expenditure is going to lead to an investment that's going to yield back profits that are more than what you're spending.
Great, thank you. And we are running close up to our 30-minute allotments. I want to try to get a few more questions in here. And you talked about a few issues ranging from education to criminal justice reform, transportation, the economy. So let's play out the scenario that the voters elect you as the new state senator for Legislative District 12. You go and start session next January. What are maybe the top 2 to 3 issues that you would like to really push for this district, and why?
The top 3 issues for me are going to be education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Those 3 actually work with each other. They work really well with each other. One kind of supports the other, if you will. We have to make sure that we fully fund our schools. There is no excuse for this. Arizona is at the bottom in terms of per pupil funding. We have been at the bottom for a long time, even pre 2007, 2008 recession levels. Despite the little bit of in pay that teachers have received by way of um, pay increases, we still have not refunded. We still have not returned to pre-recession levels. And so what happens is when we fail to fund our public schools, we end up in a situation where our kids um, potentially are being failed and they're falling through the cracks. We end up with a situation where we don't have a well-educated population, and so jobs job creators are not looking to come to our state, because in order to be able to, one of the things that they look at other than infrastructure, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but the other thing that they look at is whether or not there's a well-educated populace to take on the jobs and the needs that they have. And so it is important, not just for the sake of wanting to make sure that we educate our kids just to be good citizens, but because ultimately that becomes the future. Educating our children becomes the future of our state. Our state is entirely dependent on our children for its future, and education is the way to do it. Now, when it comes to healthcare, now with the pandemic, I have taken a second look at healthcare. It was not one of my top priorities, but it is now, primarily because of the pandemic. And the reason is because 500 or so thousand people are out of work. And what does that mean for those people who are out of work? A lot of them who lost their jobs now don't have health care. And unemployment pays about $240 a month. COBRA, okay, to pick up their health insurance is about $500 a month. And so that's 2 out of 4 paychecks. How will they pay rent, and how will they put food on the table, or even put gas in their vehicles to look for jobs? That is problematic. And so I think that healthcare needs to be one of the things that we have to address, particularly now that the pandemic has really peeled back the layers to show us how detrimental it is that every single person in our state does not have health insurance. One of the things that we can do, and I believe that it was Senator Kelly Butler, or maybe House Representative Kelly Butler, who had proposed a bill that would basically allow those who have lost job coverage to be able to buy into our state Medicaid system. And I think that this would be one of the ways we can alleviate folks who have lost their jobs and as a result no longer have health care. And then finally, to talk about infrastructure. So Prop 400, I think it was passed back in 2014 or so. Yeah. And what it has done is it has raised about $3 billion or so in revenue for our state. And what that did was it created bus routes on the grid, Loop 303. But most importantly, I want to talk about the East Valley. What did that do? Prior to Loop 202 being constructed, out here in the East Valley, most of the jobs were around the hub of North Gilbert, near Mesa by the 60. As a result of Prop 404 passing by 58, something like that, percent of the voters, we were able to then extend Loop 202 all the way down to the 24 to where Ellsworth meet out in Queen Creek. And as a result of Loop 202 being built, what ended up happening is our job hub actually relocated to more of a centralized area in Gilbert, near the Santan Valley, where the autoplexes and the hotels and other job centers. And what that did was people who are looking to develop, they often want to bring their money to develop in areas that are near the highway. And so as a result, that meant that jobs came to Gilbert. And so infrastructure, education, healthcare, all work in tandem together for the greater good of the economy and moving our state forward.
Thank you. So we have just enough time for one quick question here, and it's a great one for Legislative District 12. What makes you a good fit for this district?
I hesitate on how to answer this question. Honestly, I, I'm going to talk about my opponent a little bit. And basically, I'm the opposite. I am his 100% polar opposite. For example, when it comes to unemployment in our state, Mitzi Epstein had announced an amendment that would extend the length of pay raise amount to help those who have lost their jobs. And according to news sources, Petersen pulled a procedural move to block her amendment from being heard. I obviously would not have supported such a measure because, as you have heard me talk about, I have talked about the importance of making sure that our families who are unemployment are able to survive. Because if they are not able to put food on the table, pay rent, and be able to look for gainful employment, then that means that they're not spending any money back into the economy, and that's going to hurt small businesses because we depend on the people within our communities to be able to come out to the small businesses and to spend money. But when they don't have the resources, they're not going to spend that money. And in basically our small businesses are the ones who are mostly impacted and hurt by this. At the height of the pandemic, back in July, Petersen posted in a tweet that, reposted, excuse me, a post by Jim Jordan that barbecues should be happening right now and football games should be happening right now and people should be in schools. Again, I'm someone who believes in the science. In July, we were at the height of the pandemic in our state. And what should have been happening is we should have been asking people to follow the science and to mask up. And he refuses to support that with his argument about, the his freedom, according to the Constitution, the ability of the people to be free. And so that is problematic because we really have to be conscientious and we have to care about one another. Yes, we want our businesses to thrive, but how are our businesses going to thrive when people are dying? And they're not getting the support and the services that they need. So there's an area where again we're polar opposites. Um, and and by the way, he was the only lawmaker out of 90 lawmakers. He was the only one to vote against medical coverage for pre-existing conditions. And so I have already talked about healthcare and why I believe healthcare is important. And this is just a disaster. Why would we not want people with pre-existing medical conditions to be covered? I mean, a lot of these people are elderly. So I mean, it just seems like to me this is the behavior of someone with a depraved heart, to be honest with you. And then let's talk about the fact that he voted no to mitigate the impact of COVID. He did not want COVID relief for you and your family. He voted no against temporarily stocking local food banks. He voted no against providing services, COVID services, assistance for small businesses. So this is someone who is just giving lip service to small businesses. He doesn't really care about small businesses and the fact that small businesses are suffering, because when it came down to assisting and helping them, he voted no. And you can look this up on at the Arizona legislature on his voting record. And so it's not enough to just give lip service to the people and provide smoke screens and to say that you're all for business and you support businesses when the reality is, when it comes down to when it is within your power to do something to actually support and to help small businesses, you vote no. And so I believe that I'm the person who doesn't just care about businesses, but I care about people in general. And I understand the role of small businesses within our communities and that they are the lifeblood of our communities. And we have to do whatever we have to do to help them not fall under as a result of the pandemic. And so in terms of me and my opponent, I mean, I could go on. but I'm going to stop
Well,
for the benefit
we're
of
getting
time.
close to the end of the time here, so
Yeah,
I bet you could go
absolutely.
on, and I appreciate that. So this seems like it might be a good segue to go into your closing remarks. So if you would like to provide those now, that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Clean Elections, the viewers, our moderator, Michelle, for hosting this debate. Thank you for the opportunity to speak directly to the voter. Every so often, a voter will ask me to convince them to vote for them. I always tell them I don't do that. I want you to vote informed. So let's talk about the issues that matter to you most, and you decide if my position mirrors your values. Last election cycle, I talked about how electing these incumbents will produce the same, if not worse, results. And quite frankly, the pandemic has shown just how inadequate and unfit my opponent is to lead. Think about the things that matter most to you: healthcare, your child's education, and even your own, as some are in between jobs and careers, and ask yourself, who will fight for my family's survival and prosperity? Who understands that anyone can fall on hard times and will demand our government stand up for us and be accountable for the money that we have given them in good times and in good faith? And will not forget that we ultimately are the ones that they serve. In good times, we must save for a rainy day, but when the monsoon comes, we must prioritize life above all else. Who will not spend their time pushing for an agenda that would only serve to place more burden and liability on you due to the lack of forethought and short-sightedness? Who truly believes that women are equal and will fight to elevate them in every piece of legislation possible? Who will listen to the science and make sure that we do not go backwards and end up hurting our economy more than it has already taken a hit? And men, I push for equality of women, and I'm not leaving you out, as I know you too, you want to protect the women in your life, your mothers, your wives, your daughters, your nieces, and your grandbabies. Good men defend and support women, and most importantly, they want to see them represented so that their issues unique to them are not ignored and dealt with the highest regard. In the House and Senate race, the candidates have slated themselves because they are carbon copies of one another. The House race is unimposed, so my opponent's views will be represented. When you vote for me, you're balancing the legislature in our district. For the Senate race, you have two options, but only one of us has the temperament, along with the educational skills and life experience, to fight for you and your family. I believe that I'm the one. I humbly ask for your vote so that everyone in our district is truly represented. Women, children, and families are all uplifted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this concludes our debate. To our candidate, Lynsey Robinson, we thank you so much for participating. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the November 3rd election. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is your source for nonpartisan voter information. We encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for all of your voting needs. Thank you and have a good night.